Okay. All right, I think we're all set and ready to go. I want to just thank you all for being here. My name is Kim Laney. I'm your OLLI coordinator. And it doesn't look like Jane Woodward, our usual, she's our coordinator of these brown bag presentations, and it doesn't look like she's going to be able to make it today due to some connectivity issues. And I just also wanted to let you know that I have turned on closed captioning, and if you don't want the closed captioning on your device, you can turn it off. You just navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen and find the closed caption icon and turn off subtitles. Let's see. I also want to remind you that it's time to renew your OLLI membership. If you're not a member for the new year, then you can go ahead and join. And we have lots of great summer classes, and we'd love to have you sign up for some of those. We have about 2 more weeks of the summer, and then we'll be starting fall in September. Today, we'd like to thank the Friends of OLLI who have donated and provided support to make these weekly brown bag presentations possible. We'd love it if you could help by giving to OLLI today. Following the presentation, we will make these the recording available, and if you navigate to the brown bag page on the OLLI website, you can find the archive located there, and all the brown bag presentations that we've had over the past couple of years are there, so you can always go back and watch any other presentations you've missed, and we invite you to do that. At this time, we'd like you to mute yourself, and as far as questions go, if you have a question as Matthew is talking, please feel free to raise your hand. You can either just raise your hand, you can use the raise hand function. You can put your question in the chat, and I will be monitoring that, as well as our student assistant, Alex, who's here with us today. Thank you again for being here. And that is that. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Matthew today. Matthew Marshall is the Executive Director of the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, a joint powers agency of Humboldt County, local governments dedicated to implementing sustainable energy initiatives in the region, including operating the local community choice energy program. He's a graduate of Humboldt State University. Wow. Matthew is president of the California Community Choice Association and serves on the board of directors of several local nonprofits, including the Trinidad Coastal Land Trust, the Humboldt Folk Life Society, the Redwood Parks Conservancy, and the Greater Eureka Chamber of Commerce. He plays the bagpipes and is an assistant chief on the West Haven Fire Department. Matthew, thank you so much for being here today. And go ahead and get started, and be watching for questions.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Great, thanks for having me. And let me pull up my slides here and see if I can do that correctly. And there we go. All right. Yeah, thanks again for having me here. And I was asked to talk about what's going on as far as our local renewable energy efforts, as well as also how folks can get involved themselves in that transition to renewable energy. Just a little outline. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview about RCEA in case anyone isn't familiar with us. And then I'm going to kind of go from big to sort of small scales and talk about efforts around offshore wind energy development, and then cover a little bit on the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid project that is under construction right now. And then just real briefly, mention some of the other renewable energy projects that we have going on, as well as those kind of 2 flagship ones. And then talk about customer programs that people can participate in that we offer. So, at a high level, we're a local government joint powers agency of the County of Humboldt, the 7 incorporated cities in the county, as well as the Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District. We were formed in 2003 to implement sustainable energy initiatives on behalf of our member governments and their constituents. And have been doing that since 2003. We're governed by a board of directors that have an appointed member from each of those other jurisdictions. So, rep from the board of supervisors, from each of the city councils, and the water district board of directors. That's our governing body. and we've been, we started out focused on energy efficiency and have grown that over the years to include work on alternative forms of transportation, electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as renewable energy planning. And then in 2017, we launched what is now by far our largest program, which is the Community Choice Energy Program, or Community Choice Aggregation is the technical term, but we usually call it a Community Choice Energy Program since that's sort of a wonky technical term. And I'll talk a little bit about what that really is. And so that's kind of a lead in. If you're not too familiar with the program, it's basically a state law that allows local governments or groups of local governments through a joint powers agency like our CEA to procure electricity on their customers' behalf with the existing utility, which is for us PG&E, continuing to provide the transmission distribution, as well as kind of the customer interface as far as metering and customer billing and responding to outages and all that. So the existing utility continues to do all those things. So as far as a visual of that, we're really kind of on the supply side. So our CEA is responsible for procuring the sources of electricity. PG&E still delivers it to your home and maintains the infrastructure to do that, up into and including your meter on your house. And then, that provides affordable rates to our customers and provides more local control and the opportunity to increase our use of local renewable resources. So as far as the model of CCAs, in the intro I mentioned Cal CCA is the trade association, and the first CCA in California. There's CCAs in other states across the country, but in California, the first one was launched in Marin in 2010, and currently now there's over 11 million customers served by CCAs across the state. We're actually one of the smaller CCAs, and we're the farthest north, but they now go all the way down to San Diego, and it's becoming one of the main ways that renewable energy is being procured in the state, and it's becoming sort of the default more and more so in the state of California. So why did we do it in the first place, and what are we working on? Just to briefly cover that, there's sort of no change in the reliability. Sometimes it's more reliable than others in our area, but PG&E still has the same funding and the same operations to maintain the grid, but it gives us that local control over where our power is coming from, and that lets us increase the use of renewable energy, pursue lowering our greenhouse gas emissions faster than the state mandates that exist, and provide, in our case, lower rates. We've had consistently lower rates since we launched in 2017 and have cumulatively delivered, I think, something like $6 million in customer rate savings since we launched the program, while also achieving these other goals. And so, it's the default provider. So we serve about 95%, I believe, of the customers in the county. You have the option to opt out and go back to PG&E. Most people don't choose to do that because it would cost you more money to do that than sticking with us, and obviously then you wouldn't be participating in some of the local efforts that we're able to achieve through the program. So at the core, when we launched this program, the goal was to maximize the use of local renewable energy while providing competitive rates to our customers, compared to PG&E, or the default option of what we would otherwise get if people were with PG&E and we didn't have this program. And so that's been sort of the guiding goal, and part of that local renewable focus has been to both achieve environmental objectives, but also to support local economic development and look for ways to invest our energy dollars here in our community. Our budget for the program is about $50 million a year for our CCA program, and the more of those dollars we can spend locally and invest in programs, the better for the community. And my board adopted a target of trying to get our electricity mix to be completely fossil fuel free by 2025, which is basically 20 years ahead of the state target for getting to 100% clean and renewable energy by 2045. So, and we're so far on track to hopefully achieve that 2025 goal. So, what are we doing to achieve that goal? And that's where I'm going to cover a couple of sort of our most, I think, exciting projects. And the one that's, probably the longest timeline, because there's a lot of planning involved, but that we've been working on since 2017, is developing local offshore wind energy off our coast here. And so to kind of put it in context, this is a map of like the wind resource of the United States. The darker, the better. And what you'll notice is, the plains and Wyoming have some pretty dark areas. But if you look at like the biggest, darkest patch on this map, it's off the coast of Northern California and Southern Oregon. And so our offshore wind resource is really a world-class opportunity for renewable energy generation. And offshore wind in general is much farther along in Europe. It's pretty common there, and in other parts of the world, it's increasingly common on the East Coast. It's starting to really take off. But the reason why, one of the reasons why the West Coast has been sort of behind the curve on that is that our water gets very deep, very sort of quickly as you go off the coast. In Europe or on the East Coast, there's kind of a big shallow shelf where you can do fixed bottom foundations. But to do any kind of project off of the West Coast, you really need to use floating foundations to be able to make that successful. And what the heck does a floating wind turbine look like? Well, here's a few different styles of foundations. These are kind of conceptual illustrations of the types of foundations, but basically, for the most part, it's actually transferring engineering and design that's been used for a long time in the oil and gas offshore industry, and basically sort of scaling it down and putting a wind turbine on it with some adjustments. But these types of floating foundations are not new technology. It's just more a newer application. But this type of floating foundation has really reached commercial viability and is being deployed in Europe, and that's really where in the last few years, as that the first demonstration projects kind of turned into the first commercial pilot projects in Europe, it became clear that this was something that could now technically be done in California, and that's when we really started to see a lot of more interest from both developers as well as the state to see if we could take advantage of this resource. To contribute to our California renewable energy goals. And so this is a photograph, not a computer rendering of a floating wind farm of 3 turbines off the coast of Portugal. And this is a project, one of the projects that some of the companies we're partnering with. They own and operate this, and the foundations are actually a California-based company called Principal Power that we're partnering with. And so they design, and they're the design company that developed this particular style of floating foundation, and they're one of the sort of industry leaders as far as how far they're along towards commercialization, which is why we selected them. There's some other technical reasons related to Humboldt Bay and our water depths that we also thought it was the right technological fit for the North Coast. So as far as the process, we really wanted to, have a community-driven approach to exploring this resource. And, I think that's something we've heard from the community, and a lot of our planning work is like the community wants to have, a role in decision-making, and to be able to, have sort of a seat at the table as the process moves forward. I think we've seen other types of projects, or even other local wind projects, be unsuccessful when the process maybe didn't involve the level of community engagement that folks felt was needed. So to that end, before anything started really getting going up here at the federal or state level, we issued a request for qualification, sorry for the acronym, in 2018 for basically for development partners. We put it out. We said, hey, if you're, we've got this resource, we want to see it developed in a community focused, way. And if you as a developer are interested in really doing this as a public-private partnership, we need somebody that has both the financial as well as the technical capabilities to pull this off. And so we actually got a very strong response from like 5 different teams of international offshore wind developers. So I think that showed the level of interest from the industry in the North Coast and the resource here. And so, in addition to work, and the selection process for those partners that we ultimately chose, I'll talk more about them later. We actually had a community evaluation team that reviewed these proposals from developers to sort of say, how are you going to, engage the community, work with the community? We had somebody from commercial fishing, local tribal representation, economic development, union labor, environmental organizations. And so, we tried to kind of get a selection of people that represented different local stakeholder perspectives, and then had them asking the developers, so instead of fishermen or tribes being kind of on the defense, they got to say, well, why should we work with you? Why should we, have you come to our community? So that was, really kind of at the heart of the approach that we've been taking, is to have the community not just be sort of waiting for a developer to come along and pick us, but to rather be proactive about it and make it clear what kind of community engagement we want to see as the whole process moves forward. And along with that, we did a lot of outreach back in 2018 when things were first getting going. And I'll talk about the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management lease process in a second, but that resulted in us submitting what's called an unsolicited lease request. We basically identified an area off the coast where we said, we think this is where a wind farm could go. And we'd like to see that the federal government put that up for a potential lease, and they have sort of an official process for how you make those requests. And we did that, and we actually again had a lot of community support, not for like the final project, but to say, hey, this is a good first step. Let's identify the area. Let's start the environmental analysis. And so we had letters of support from the Wiyot tribe and other tribes, as well as a lot of local environmental groups and other community groups. And so really trying to move it forward with the community as a part of the process. So that was in 2018, and what's been going on since then. So the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, is who leases waters off basically the federal waters 3 miles or farther off the coast. They have a specific offshore wind leasing process, and they go through a number of steps where they kind of identify a preliminary area, then they kind of finalize that area, and then ultimately they hold a lease auction where interested developers basically bid cash to secure an ocean lease. That's not permission to build the project, it's permission to start studying it. So it's like you get sort of site control of your patch of water, and then that's when the kind of design and environmental review actually begins. So it's a little bit kind of backwards, because you have to get the lease before you can actually really get into that environmental assessment. And so this map, basically the green area is what we submitted in our original request, and fairly shortly after that, and we had an indication that they were thinking they were going to do this. BOEM basically established one of their sort of official commercial areas, which you can see is the pink area, which they sort of slapped on top of our area for the most part, and sort of absorbed our lease request into their statewide California process. There's 2 areas down on the central coast near Morro Bay that have also been identified as potential wind development areas on the central coast of California. But the Humboldt area in pink is what they identified. And basically between 2018 and this year, there was sort of a little bit of a slow process, mostly due to Department of Defense concerns on the Central Coast. There was a lot, they do a lot of Navy testing and training, and just, there's a lot of activity in the water down there. And so the Department of Defense basically said, we're not going to let these move forward. There was a lot of kind of slowdown in the process, and they had the option to maybe move something forward in Humboldt, but they wanted to do it as sort of a combined California effort for various reasons. And so we kind of got caught up in that battle between the Department of Defense and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in the state on the Central Coast. This year, those Central Coast issues have seemed to be resolved under the new administration, and they've kind of adjusted some of those Central Coast areas to be, you know, viable from an energy development standpoint, but also agreeable to the Department of Defense. And so, you know, we're seeing things pick up much more rapidly again this year. And the Biden administration, you know, set some pretty ambitious offshore wind goals at the federal level, wanting to see this be a big part of both their sort of clean energy efforts as well as their job creation efforts. So I wouldn't say there was still a lot of activity over those last few years, but I think the trajectory has changed pretty significantly this year at the federal level. And so that's the area, you know, it's about 25 miles off the coast of Eureka, so you can see Humboldt Bay down in the corner. And so that near shore line, you know, boundary is about 25 miles off the coast, 20 or so. And so the project that we're working on, which will hopefully be, you know, within a lease of somewhere in that area, and that's a big area, that's like 200 square miles. And so we're looking at something much smaller than that to start for a couple reasons. You know, we're proposing and have been working on since 2018 is something more in the 100 to 150 megawatt range, which, if you don't think in megawatts, that's a pretty, you know, significant chunk of what the energy needs are for Humboldt County. It's the same size as like the PG&E natural gas power plant down at King Salmon. So it's a small project from an offshore wind commercial typical project scale, but it's a big project for Humboldt. And that would generally take about 10 to 15 turbines to generate that much energy. The offshore wind turbines are much larger than the ones you see on land because you're not constrained by what you can move around on a road. And so the height of these things are like as tall as the Golden Gate Bridge. And so they're much larger, which makes them more efficient. You get, you know, more power from fewer turbines when you can scale up out in the ocean. So, you know, like I said, it's about 25 miles off the coast. And then, you know, the partners we selected that we're working with are a company called Ocean Winds, which is a joint venture of a Portuguese-based and a French-based company, although they do renewable energy projects around the world. They specifically sort of spun off this offshore wind company. Aker Offshore Wind is a Norwegian-based company, although they're also, you know, international in their scope, and they do a lot of ocean engineering type work, undersea cables. They've got like an undersea cable manufacturing facility in Alabama, and they, you know, have a lot of engineering expertise. You know, their kind of roots were in boat building back in like the 1800s, and then when they discovered, you know, oil and gas off from Norway's coast, and, you know, they got into the engineering of that kind of technology and floating foundations and things like that. And then, you know, basically said, hey, we know how to build crazy stuff in the ocean. We could really put these skills to use in the offshore wind sector, and it doesn't hurt that you know, if you look at their stock price for their oil and gas businesses, they're going down because the writing's on the wall that oil and gas is not the business to be in anymore. And so, you know, they're you know, pivoting their skill set to support offshore renewable energy. And then Principal Power is the company that I mentioned that's the engineering design firm that developed this particular floating foundation technology. So here's just kind of a computer rendering of what that would look like. You know, again, this would be about 25 miles off the coast, but, you know, something in the range of 10 to maybe 15 turbines. And, you know, that this kind of array would basically be able to provide a pretty significant chunk of the power needs of Humboldt County. So that's what we're working on. And, you know, one of the other elements that is a necessary first step is to have port infrastructure that can support this industry. And so we have been working with the Harbor District and others to try to, you know, position Humboldt Bay as like the West Coast offshore wind port. Supervisor Mike Wilson has been saying, you know, we're going to be the Cape Canaveral of offshore wind, as far as we're well located sort of centrally to actually provide, you know, deployment for projects, not just off the coast of Humboldt, but in other parts of the Pacific as well, because you can do the assembly in the harbor, and then you tugboat these units once they're assembled to wherever they're going to be plugged in and placed, anchored. And it's not just a Humboldt thing. The state and the federal government realized that Humboldt Bay is well suited, one, because we got an abundance of what you could kindly say is underutilized industrial land around the bay these days. And also because these things are deployed so fully assembled, like vertical and towed around, you can't do it anywhere like in the Bay Area because you can't fit them under the Golden Gate Bridge. And so you need that vertical draft to be able to get them out to sea. And so Humboldt Bay is well suited to that. And here's kind of a conceptual rendering of what that might look like as far as the harbor district's focused on Redwood Marine Terminal 1, which is the big sort of rotting wood dock that's next to sort of below the smoke cookhouse. And they're going to need to entirely rebuild that dock because the weight bearing requirements for this kind of work greatly exceeds the current what that dock could support. That dock at this point is a little dicey to support a human being, let alone a wind turbine. So they're pursuing funding to basically redevelop that dock and have it be able to support this industry. And the exciting news is they've gotten a first step of help from the state of California, and that the state approved in this year's budget that just recently got finalized, $11 million specifically to support offshore wind harbor infrastructure development. So it says Humboldt County offshore wind dock, $11 million in the state budget. And where that number came from is that there's a federal grant that the harbor district just submitted last Friday, was the due date, for potentially another like $56 million or so. And so that grant had match requirements, and the state said, how can we help? And we basically said, well, we don't have the match to go for this federal funding. And they're like, what if we give you $11 million to meet the match requirements? And so that grant's not a shoe-in at the federal level, but I think it's got pretty good odds considering the administration's stated interest in supporting offshore wind and job creation, because you can't do the work locally if you don't have the harbor infrastructure. So to get the jobs local, you have to do this first. And so that's kind of be another next big step. So as far as what's going on now, in addition to that harbor infrastructure development and hopefully securing that funding to get that built, we're ramping back up our stakeholder engagement efforts, which have kind of been in a holding pattern since 2018 while we waited for the federal process to get going again. And so we're going to be doing more outreach and kind of re-engaging with a lot of the folks that we worked with back in 2018. And then the lease process for California is expected to take place in mid 2022. And so they're on track, and they've got their timeline going, and they've got a number of steps to go through to get to that lease. And so that's where things are at. But with some ongoing, if the momentum continues, that lease auction will take place, and then that'll allow kind of the real sort of permitting and analysis and design work to start happening off our coast. So the other project, and this one's almost built, so that one's kind of in the planning stages, but in progress. That'll probably be a 5 or 6 year timeline from now to get something constructed, assuming that all the permitting and other efforts end up being approvals for that to happen. But we're working on a microgrid at the county airport, which is a solar and battery storage project mainly. So if you're not familiar of what a microgrid is, it's basically, the definition here, an interconnected system of loads and energy resources that can connect and disconnect with the main grid to either run sort of in parallel with the grid or as an island, a little grid island separate from the grid. And so It's basically like, your home backup generator where you can switch over to a backup generator, or your home solar array, but being able to use that as backup power. But in general, it's usually multiple facilities, multiple energy sources, and so a little bit more complicated than just like a simple backup system, because you're able to tie together a bunch of different resources. And then the benefits of that is you're able to kind of get the renewable generation. If you're doing a renewable powered microgrid, you get that on a daily basis. You get the renewable power, but then you get energy resilience and emergency response capabilities when the grid goes down, by being able to island and operate separately. And then by also having those kinds of advanced controls, it lets you potentially sort of integrate renewable resources with the grid better, maybe build bigger than you would have otherwise been able to build at a particular spot on the grid. And then also provide grid services by being able to kind of manage the system more actively to support a resilient and cost-effective grid operation. Our most famous, and actually one of the most famous in general, microgrids is the one at the Blue Lake Rancheria that they developed with a lot of support from the Schatz Energy Research Center. And so, this is kind of one that's up and running today. And so we took a lot of the lessons learned from that and are working with the folks at the Schatz Energy Research Center to do something a little bit bigger than that and a little bit more complicated than that. I'll talk about those two elements of it. So the project is really kind of a partnership, with a number of organizations. The funding is primarily from RCEA and a grant from the California Energy Commission that the folks at the Schatz Energy Research Center got. And so they got a $5 million grant, and we're contributing about $6.5 million or so of RCEA funds to build the system. RCEA will own and operate the solar and battery storage, generation resources. And then PG&E will own and operate the grid part of it and the control system to operate in islanded, disconnected from the broader grid mode whenever that happens. And then the HSU Schatz Center is the technical lead. They're designing the system and managing both the grant as well as the overall implementation of the project. And then we're partnering with the county, obviously, who owns the land and is the site host and beneficiary of the system at the county airport. So as far as where it's going to be, this is kind of the rendering of it. And if you drive by there, it actually is starting to look a lot like this. Most of the panels are up now, and the batteries are in place, and a lot of the control systems are there now. So this is kind of south of the main terminal building, it's Badsgard Road. If you go past like the rental car parking lot, it's a chunk of land there. And it's the first front of the meter multi-customer microgrid in PG&E's territory, and one of the first anywhere. And what that means is most microgrids, like the one at the Blue Lake Rancheria, are a single customer where they can kind of isolate their own facility. So it's like a campus. And so there's multiple facilities and multiple, resources, but it's one kind of owner, and they just kind of disconnect, and everything behind that disconnection is just, that entity's own sort of private grid. And so most microgrids are set up that way, where you see, campuses sort of like the Rancheria's facilities, or a military base, or, potentially a corporate campus or a university. And what's different and unique and new about this is that we're actually using the PG&E grid to supply multiple customers when it goes into island mode. And so the system has this larger, 2 megawatt solar array with a similarly sized battery system. And under normal conditions, that system will just be putting power onto the grid to supply power to RCE's customers as part of our power portfolio. And there's also a chunk of this array. It looks like one big array, but there's actually kind of two arrays. One piece of it will actually be a net metered behind the meter array to power the actual airport facilities. That's our rent, basically, is the power from that chunk of the system is going to the airport, and that'll save them, I think, about $50,000 a year in electricity costs. So that's our rent for the whole site. as far as our CEAs sort of paying the county back.
Matthew, this is Kim. There's a question in the chat. It says, when I lived at the airport in the late 1950s, it was known as the second foggiest place in the world next to London. Why was a microgrid located there?
Yeah, so good question. And so one of the things is we actually have pretty good data on what the weather, is like, and it's actually, weather is starting to change as the climate changes, but so we have actually, because it's an airport and there's lots of weather data, we're able to know what the economics are, and it is definitely not the sunniest place, but it still works. And that's one of the things, it's kind of like, there's just because there's places where you get more output from the solar array, it still works quite well. Even in a cloudier, foggier location, the panels are actually tilted to the west, and the fog tends to burn off on average in the afternoon more. So that kind of helps as well as far as the configuration of the array. And we're also using what are called like bifacial panels. So they actually can generate from the back of the panel from ambient light. And so they're much more efficient. And so, but as far as like, well, why did we pick this location? It wasn't because it was like, let's find the sunniest place in Humboldt County to do this. It was more about, one, the airports are a great place to do solar because they have a bunch of flat space where they don't want buildings and they don't want people and they don't want animals. And so a number of years back when they were updating the airport master plan, they even identified several sites that they said, well, we don't really have anything going on there. This could be a good place to do solar. And you see solar at a lot of airports around the world. So part of it was the availability of underutilized land, because this does take up a fair amount of space, and so having land that doesn't have a higher or better use is one element of it. And then the other part was to get the resiliency out of it, and that's kind of the last bullet here, was by locating this next to the airport and equally important, the Coast Guard Air Station. We're able to basically take that solar and storage and provide like backup power to those facilities through this control system. And so if there's an emergency or natural disaster, the airport and the Coast Guard are obviously two of our most important critical facilities in a disaster. And so being able to provide basically indefinite renewable backup power to those facilities was a key driver for siting it here. So while we could have gotten more solar by putting the array somewhere else, we can't move the airport and the Coast Guard somewhere else to take advantage of that. And so it's really more about serving these critical facilities, not about prioritizing we worked from the critical facility to the solar, not from solar and to the facility. And so, and again, it still works even if, the desert, you get more output from your array, but that doesn't mean that, it doesn't work here in our cloudier climate as well. And so, we're moving that forward. We had a kind of a slightly late groundbreaking event. That's me and my little 2-year-old daughter with the gold shovels there. On the right is the commander of the Humboldt Bay sector. And, he was talking about how, they obviously have backup generators that run off of, fuel. And they're still going to have those as another line of defense. But, this will just basically add both an additional layer of resilience because they'll have double backup. And then also, they in general, the airport or the Coast Guard wouldn't need to use their fuel that they have on site to power generators because they would be able to rely pretty much indefinitely on the solar and battery storage to provide their power needs. So, that creates an opportunity to put that fuel in an emergency to some other use. And we even saw that in the public safety power shutoffs a little while back, where, due to the constraints on liquid fuels, they're starting to have to make choices of do we put it in, the sheriff's cars, or do we put it in the, generators, or which facilities generators? And so this will help free up that resource for other needs. And because it's actually such a large system, one of the things we've been starting to talk about with the county is like potentially, having an emergency, sort of shelter plan using the airport property in some way, to basically take advantage of this backup power. So if there is an emergency, that it could be a shelter facility or other kind of operational facility for in a time of need to take advantage of that. And we saw that with in some of the outages, like the Blue Lake Rancheria, people with medical equipment, people were going there to get charge their vehicle or get fuel at the gas station, or go to the convenience store, and so having facilities where people can go in a disaster can be important. So construction is underway. Like I said, if you drive by there, it's starting to look a lot like a big solar array. Most of the panels are up, and we're on schedule to hopefully have it up and running end of this year, beginning of 2022. And that'll be the biggest solar array in the county once it's done. So some other renewable energy projects, I just got one slide just to kind of mention other things. Those are kind of two of the ones that are most exciting. Oh, and, one thing I'll say about this actually that's, I mentioned is sort of the first of its kind, where a microgrid's powering a bunch of different customers on a branch of PG&E's grid. And that, that's something that is actually being used. So there's a new PG&E statewide program rolling out called the Community Microgrid Enablement Program. That's basically based off of the work we did here in Humboldt to try to figure out, to support replicating these kinds of systems across the state. And so PG&E basically this is the first one, and they're rolling it out now to other communities and other critical facilities, and using this as kind of the template for this kind of project across the state. So it's exciting that it's good for our community, but we actually kind of piloted something here that, because no one had done it before, is now being spread and used as a model statewide, which is also why we got a grant from the California Energy Commission, because it was innovative and exciting in that way.
There's another question. Will the airport site include an electrical vehicle charging?
Yeah, it will. That's one of the sort of a sub element I didn't mention, but we're putting in a bank of EV chargers at the airport as part of this project as well. So, yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, just some other projects. Some are local, some are not. But as far as the map of where we're at for sort of long-term renewable energy supply, talked about the offshore wind, and talked about the airport microgrid on the left there. Those are the two top dots. But we also have what's called a feed-in tariff program for local solar. And there's a project that's in the process of being developed and constructed out in Blue Lake, kind of down on Hatchery Road near the fish hatchery. And then another one down in the Hydesville area. And so those projects are both scheduled to be, I think, online before the end of next year. And so that'll add another chunk of solar into the power mix at the utility scale. We've got a contract with the existing biomass facility at the Humboldt Redwood Company sawmill down in Scotia. That's not a new facility. These are all being newly built. Then at a kind of non-local level, we have a contract for a small, like what's called run-of-river hydroelectric project over in Shasta County. That's a pretty tiny one, but it's a long-term contract we have. So there's no dam associated with it. It's just like part of the water gets put through a pipe when there's water available, and then it goes through a turbine, goes back into the river, but there's no barrier in the river. And then the Sandrini solar project down south is going to be quite large. That's where there is a lot of sun, unlike Humboldt County. And so, the way that the power grid and the power market is managed, we don't have to just rely on power built in Humboldt County. The grid is managed as like one big sort of pool of resources, and as a load serving entity, you have to put power into that big shared pool. But you can put it in different parts of California. And so the advantage of this project, which is going to be 100 megawatts, so that's like 50 times or so the size of the array at the airport. It's very, very affordable power. And so that's going to be a good resource as far as reducing costs. going to look something like this. This isn't that project because it's under construction. Again, that one's also scheduled to be done by the end of next year, beginning of the following year. But it's going to look something like that down in Kern County. And so that's going to be beginning construction soon. So that's kind of the utility scale of what we're working on. And again, a lot of megawatts of projects under development to try to get to that 100%, renewable and non-fossil fuel dependent power by 2025. But I wanted to also kind of just talk about some of the options for people to be a part of the transition themselves. And if folks are interested in going solar, the program is called net energy metering, which many of you may be familiar with. If you've got solar, you're I'm sure a net energy metering customer, unless you're off the grid entirely. But I just wanted to kind of highlight some elements of RCEA's version of this. So if you're not familiar with it, basically net energy metering lets you run your meter backwards when you're producing more than you're using during the day, and then at night your meter runs, you're drawing power from the grid to power your home at night. And the net part of the title is basically saying, okay, the net of your over generation and your consumption is what you get charged for. And so you're able to meet your loads, and because in general you're going to be producing more than you need in the middle of the day when it's very sunny. But then obviously when the sun goes down, that's when you're cooking dinner or needing to run appliances and all that. And so it lets you kind of run your meter forwards and backwards to take advantage of your solar, which not everywhere has this kind of program. So we kind of take it for granted in California because it's been around for a while, but it's very beneficial to customers that want to do solar. And so, as far as how it works, you get, we do monthly billing for our part of the bill on the generation part. And so if you generate more than you use, that rolls forward. And, we do that again to instead of PG&E's program, you just get one big bill at the end of the year, whereas we roll it forward, but have a monthly billing. So you don't have like one $500 bill at the end of the year. You just have a bunch of $10 bills over the course of the year. And then if, the credits roll forward, so if you overgenerate, in August, you roll those credits forward into September, and then, into the winter time when you're getting less output from your system. And so it kind of balances out over the course of the year. And then as those credits roll forward, basically, there's, an opportunity to cash out. So, we provide basically a 1 cent per kilowatt hour, which is about 10%. Kicker for solar generation that people produce above their needs. And so every May, we basically let folks cash out if they have surplus generation. And so for comparison, our program pays out about 11 cents because it's the retail rate plus a penny, whereas PG&E's program is only about 3 cents. So we're trying to support customers, be part of the solution and installing solar. And so providing a better benefit to installing solar in your home, about 3 times the benefit is PG&E's program. And then if you have a credit build up by every May, we basically say, hey, if you've got surplus of $100 more worth of credits that you over generated, generally you want to kind of scale your system to be about the size of your loads. From an economic standpoint, you're actually kind of required to do that to interconnect to the grid. You can't build it way too big for your home. But even with that we had about 575 customers this May, that we sent checks out to that totaled up to about $250,000 of compensation for customers that put more renewable energy onto the grid than they used at their home. And so, that's one of the ways we're trying to support renewable energy at the customer level. And we've got goals. We're trying to encourage. Our long-term plan was shooting to basically try to add a solar array in the county every day on average. So our target is to hopefully get at least 365 solar arrays added every year at customer sites. And this last year, we were pretty close to that target with 345 new net energy metering customers, solar net energy metering customers since 2022. So, we're seeing good adoption here, both at residential and commercial facilities in the county. And the last thing I'll kind of close with are some other programs that aren't about generating renewable energy, but are about using your renewable energy, whether it's from the grid or from a rooftop solar array, how to maximize the benefit of that, both from an economic and also from a climate action perspective. So I'll just get a couple single slides on a few of our different programs that we offer for customers. So, ever since we were launched, we've done energy efficiency. We offer free consultations to residents and businesses. We have customized residential energy efficiency kits. That's on the left there. Somebody's picking up one at our office back when people could go places in person and pick stuff up in person, more freely. So we'll put together sort of a customized free energy kit, and then we also have rebates, and we do a lot of work actually on the business side. Is probably where most of our activity is helping businesses as well as local governments do energy upgrades. Lane is one of our energy technicians who I made stand there and pretend like she was looking at that light bulb, so I had a picture for a slide. And so we've been, that's kind of one of our bread and butter programs, and we always are looking ways to add more programs and new technologies for energy efficiency. We also just launched a number of heat pump rebates. So these are rebates that are $500 is kind of the lowest, and it goes up from there for home heating systems, both kind of centralized heating systems as well as what are called mini split units, which are kind of like what you'd see like in a hotel window, those little type units are sort of another option. There's also air source heat pump water heaters, and also we have rebates for if someone's panel, because a lot of our older homes don't necessarily have the electric panel capacity to add more load, and so we have incentives to help people cover the cost if they need to upgrade their electrical panel to be able to add these kinds of systems. And as far as if you're not familiar what a water heater is, I almost guarantee you have at least one in your house, because a refrigerator is basically the same technology, or any air conditioner is the same technology. Basically just pushes heat from one area to another. In the case of your refrigerator, it's pulling the heat out of the refrigerator and putting it into your house. And that's what an air conditioner does as well, is it pulls the heat out of your house and puts it into the outside. And basically running an air conditioner in reverse, you pull heat from the ambient air outside and push it into your house. And it doesn't need to be hot outside to do that. It can be quite cold, and you can still extract temperatures. If it's really, really cold, then sometimes that there's the system isn't able to pull heat out of the outside. But for the most part, especially in our mild climate, I've had one of these on my home for 20 years and works just fine in our climate. And so you're able to fairly efficiently pull that heat, and it's much more efficient for heating than an electric resistance heater. So if you have an electric water heater, a heat pump water heater that's taking air rather than just heating up a coil, it's using the ambient energy in the atmosphere and pulling that in and slightly cooling the outside world, but not in a noticeable way, obviously, because the outside world is big. But it lets you, take advantage of using electricity, so you can use solar power to heat your home, heat your water much more efficiently than using, sort of just resistance heating or a resistance wall heater. So heat pumps are many times more efficient than just running a standard old-fashioned electric heater. And then that lets you either use renewable power from the grid instead of having to rely on natural gas for your water heating or your space heating needs. It lets you use either grid renewables or renewables from your rooftop. And so from a climate standpoint, The electricity grid in California is getting cleaner and cleaner from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint. But our reliance on natural gas in homes and businesses is still a big, it's becoming a bigger and bigger piece of the greenhouse gas emissions pie. And so, electrification of these kinds of systems and converting them to use renewable power is a pretty critical greenhouse gas reduction strategy that we're hoping to support with these new rebates to help reduce the upfront cost of converting to these types of systems. Another option to, again, not generate power, but to use power most beneficially is small scale battery systems. This is a picture of like a kind of Tesla wall pack, which is a residential scale system that, basically at a home or even a business, and we're seeing a lot of systems going around. You might see big white boxes that say Tesla on them. Those are battery systems. Like at Eureka City Hall and down in Fortuna and quite a few places around the county, that you use a home battery system or a commercial battery system to get better bang for your buck. So you can use it to basically move around when you can charge the battery from whether it's your home solar array or just the grid when power is low cost, and then basically then use the battery to provide power when prices are higher. And in California, where prices are higher in general or in the evening hours, both that's when the power is the dirtiest and the most expensive, because as our abundant solar resources in California produce in the middle of the day, prices are actually quite low and getting lower because we just have so much solar in California. But the problem is the sun goes down, and then you have natural gas plants ramping up, and those are both dirty and expensive to meet the demand in evening hours. And so we're looking at both, utility scale battery systems like we're doing at the airport to basically help shift our solar generation to when we need it in those evening hours. But you can do that at home as well. And so with time varying pricing becoming the norm, you can use a system like this to kind of charge the battery when it's cheap, and then use that battery when it's when power prices are higher and the grid is the dirtiest, so you can offset that dirty evening power. The other advantage obviously is these can be configured to provide backup power if there's an outage or an emergency, and particularly if you've got solar, you can configure it. A solar array won't really provide you backup power. Just a standard solar array, if the power goes out, you're not like, oh, I can use my solar. It's like you need to install more equipment. And so these systems allow you to both use that solar energy in a backup mode, but also to use it in the evening hours and not just when the sun's up. And so they add an element of resilience. And the program that I mentioned here is we're rolling out a new incentive program with a company called Swell as the vendor we selected, to work with people that either want to install battery at their home or business or that already have. And basically we'll provide an incentive to let us, when there's like need on the power grid, to basically allow part of that battery capacity to be used as basically a virtual power plant to offset the times when the grid is constrained or in need. And so it's kind of an exciting program. So instead of just building big centralized battery systems, that are connected to the grid, this is like a distributed approach where actually individual customer systems can be pooled together, and then we can actually like use that for like managing the grid and helping reduce costs at the grid level and provide reliable power and help support the integration of renewable energy. And so it's kind of a neat opportunity for individual customers, if they want to get a little incentive to use this system on a day-to-day basis to support the grid. You can be part of that sort of virtual power plant. And so that's a program that we just are launching now. And so stay tuned for more info. We just signed the contract with those guys a couple of months ago, and are going to be rolling it out here shortly. So I think that's the other thing I just mentioned is as far as using renewable power, the biggest slice of our emissions is transportation, our greenhouse gas emissions in Humboldt County are dominated by our vehicle fuel combustion. And so if you've got solar on your roof, or you just want to use renewable power from the grid, switching to an electric vehicle is an excellent solution. And obviously the best solution is not driving a car at all and walking or riding a bike or taking the bus. But if you do have to take a car trip, powering it with electricity is both less expensive. The cost of charging your vehicle at night while you sleep works out to like $1.50 a gallon gas price for that electric fuel. So it's less expensive than a gas vehicle, and it's dramatically better from an emissions standpoint with the California, even just the standard California electricity mix. And so there's state rebates and federal tax credits and things like that, but we are offering sort of an enhanced rebate, sort of an additional kicker for customers here in Humboldt, in addition to that state rebate. And we also, mentioning cars here, but we had a very popular electric bike rebate that we launched last Earth Day and got kind of gobbled up pretty quickly because there was a lot of interest. And so if you haven't checked out an electric bike, they're pretty cool because it's basically like if you're trying to like commute from Arcata, Eureka, and you don't want to be all sweaty because you don't have a shower or work or something, it's like just gives you like, it's not a motorcycle, but it's, they can go at a pretty good clip. And or for people that, maybe aren't as physically fit as they once were, or if they have to just ride up a hill, it basically lets you use, a bike as more of like a, you don't have to be like in biking mode. You can just be like, zipping around on a bike, and you can still pedal, and, it's sort of an assist to your human power. And they're, a great alternative for, to having to drive a whole giant car around to get you from one place to the other. You can just hop on an electric bike. And so I think we're going to probably have another round of rebates for electric bikes because the last one was pretty darn popular. So I see somebody in the chat just said 10 years and over 10,000 miles on my e-bike. So there's a customer testimonial that they're fun to ride and a good sort of bridge for reducing your impact. So, in kind of closing, I put up our webpage here. We've got a lot of those customer programs, and obviously not going to dive into the nuances and details of all of them. And so if folks are interested, they can go to our webpage and check out the customer programs that are available there, or folks can call our office in Eureka. That info's on the webpage too as well, or send us an email. And we can help any customers that want to know kind of what might be the right fit for them, or if we've got what programs are available. And like I said, we offer free sort of assessments, so that can help kind of figure out what might work for folks. And we're always kind of trying to find, add new programs, and then other programs that we don't offer, we'll still, refer people to those, and those are always changing. So, if you're thinking about doing an energy project or want to do something, we're always happy to help out and provide information of what resources are out there for reducing your energy costs and your environmental impact. So I think that's
there is another question in the chat, and it goes back to the wind turbines.
Mm-hmm.
It's asking, what is the impact on the aquatic life and fishing in the area?
Yeah, so if you look 25 miles, 30 miles out into the ocean, what you'll generally encounter are fishermen and wildlife. There's less wildlife interactions when you get farther from the coast, but there's definitely not none. And so, that's going to be part of, the environmental review for any project like this is going to, be a key element of addressing that. There's certainly lots of data, and, I think we're fortunate in California, we have a reputation, as you guys probably know, of being a lots of rules in California, and I think that's a good thing, because it means if you're doing something in California, you have to really do it right, or you're not going to get Coastal Commission approval. And and these kinds of projects, the project itself is in federal water, so you have federal permitting, and then it comes through state waters, and so and they work together on that overall permitting process. So there's state review, and then it actually has to come onto land to connect to the grid. And so I think it's probably not a joke to say that there will be more agencies and more permitting requirements for an offshore wind project in California than probably anywhere else on planet Earth. It's like the most permits you might have to get anywhere, because it's just like it's ocean, land, federal, state all at once. So they will definitely be a lot of environmental impact analysis. So birds is probably the primary species of concern, in the sense that any wind farm, that's stuff that's sticking up, and understanding how our local species will interact with these, and studying that. There's great expertise, and like H.G. Harvey and Associates, which does this work internationally, but they've got an Arcata office with great expertise, and so working with and obviously all the agency folks is going to be a key part of that. And so they're already starting to study that, and there's been some preliminary work, and there's ongoing efforts to kind of not just sort of project specific, but in general understand environmental impacts to wildlife. The cables, the anchor cables, are like gigantic. They're like telephone pole size. So it's like a whale is not going to get entangled in the cable. You could have stray fishing gear that could get hooked on a cable, and then a whale could get hooked on that. And so there's monitoring and making sure that there's sensors and stuff to identify and clear gear if there's something that gets caught on a cable. So that'll be a big part of the process. And you may see some announcements before they do the lease auction. There will be a environmental review, but that's really just an environmental impact assessment of leasing a chunk of ocean. And so really the only impact from just the lease is that there's going to be some monitoring and studies done. So it's not really it's a little confusing, because it's like, oh, we're going to do the wind energy area environmental impact assessment, but it's just for saying, well, are we going to let somebody do a study here? And so after that lease, that's when really the site assessment program goes into effect, and there's a federal state kind of process that will go through. So that's to say that I think wildlife impacts are key. Obviously, climate change is having huge impacts on species in our coast, and so having to balance the localized impacts with the global impacts. But that'll be a big part of the study effort in the years ahead. And then on the fishing front, that's the main human interaction. These are pretty far out, so other than in the harbor when they're being put together, they'll be slightly visible from land, but pretty hard to see. If it's a clear day, you might be able to make them out on the horizon. But commercial fishing is certainly an area of overlap, and there's different gear types. And so we've been working with commercial fishermen since 2018. That was actually one of the first groups we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association to collaborate and coordinate on basically figuring out how to coexist. And just like we love our fishing and our local seafood, we also like renewable energy, so let's figure out how to make that work together. So we're not done with that effort, but we've been working with local fishermen since 2018. I would say so far, knock on wood, we've been making good progress on kind of addressing their concerns and figuring out kind of how to mitigate and minimize the impacts to commercial fishing. And there's different gear types. So crab fishing, this is farther out than crab fishing, so that's kind of there's still potential for vessel traffic or things like that. But the farm itself, trawling like drag nets, you're not going to be able to drag through the anchor cables. You could probably fish salmon. When we talk to the sports fishermen, they're like, could you put them closer to shore, because it creates an artificial reef, so you get fish around these things. But there's certain types of fishing that would just be incompatible in the actual footprint of the farm itself, the wind farm. And so again, minimizing the impact of that and mitigating those impacts is part of what we're working on as well.
Thank you. Another question, how many people are projected to be employed by the wind energy project and where will they live?
Yeah, so I think, for the project that we're contemplating, there's a lot of excitement about jobs. And so, and even building a $60-70 million dock is going to, take some labor. There's some good studies, and I don't want to try to like paraphrase all of them, but the Schatz Energy Research Center led a number of studies on different like elements of job creation. And I think, the question is how kind of big the industry gets overall, because you'll see some numbers where it's like thousands of jobs. And I think, for labor unions and a lot of folks think that's pretty exciting. That assumes a build out of the industry. And so that would, if there's larger projects on the Central Coast or off our coast or in Oregon, you could start to see, job creation more into those like hundreds or thousands of jobs. For a smaller project, there'd be a sort of a flurry of construction jobs, but the operation and maintenance would probably just be a handful. In the sense that once it's up and running, there's not as much work to be done. And so I think from an economic development standpoint, a lot of people are interested in that kind of West Coast industry so that there's a steady, flow of projects that are creating long-term jobs and even potentially supporting manufacturing facilities in Humboldt if there's a West Coast industry. The scale up of Humboldt is constrained by the transmission system, the power grid. So, we felt like a 10 to 15 turbine project was both appropriate from sort of a first of its kind thing to be able to kick the tires and let people see what the environmental impacts are, and not to go too big and say, oh, we crossed the Rubicon and now we realize that there was unanticipated wildlife impacts that we didn't expect, and now it's hard to adjust. So a sort of a smaller scale to start, we felt like was appropriate from a community standpoint. But even if we wanted to go bigger to start, it's not technically feasible because the transmission lines in and out of the county really can't accommodate anything much bigger than what we've proposed regardless. And so upgrading those transmission lines would be like a multi-billion-dollar effort. I think there's definite interest in the potential to do those kinds of upgrades. I think we'll probably see a small project up here, and we'll see some larger projects down the Central Coast. And then maybe if those go well, that's when we would see kind of the potential for maybe big investment in more the North Coast, Southern Oregon region, that would have to go along with, that would require that kind of transmission upgrade as well. I mean, so that's where, when people look at that map I showed earlier of like the dark area, it's like, oh, this could be like, a big contributor to the state and the Western US's energy needs as far as getting off of fossil fuels. But, the transmission constraints are pretty significant. And so, the job potential kind of depends on what happens in the long run in other areas of California or Oregon and the West Coast, and also kind of the long-term, future phases of development. But there's a number of studies that I started to mention that the Humboldt State University led. If you go to the Schatz Energy Research Center webpage, they've got both the reports themselves that were funded by the state and federal government, and they looked at a lot of different topics. They looked at like wildlife impacts. They looked at sort of economic development, job creation. They looked at kind of the technical stuff like the grid interconnection. And so there's both the reports themselves, but there's also, they did a series of kind of webinars like this one last fall, and then we have the recordings of those. So, if you don't want to read a big long technical report and just want to like hear, some panel discussions, and those are fairly, sort of user-friendly, digestible. And I think they have all of those on their webpage. And so, if you want to look into the job creation one, you can watch that that session from that series or check out the report.
Nice, thank you.
And the question of where they're going to live, good question. I don't know where those of us that are here are going to live. It's like the housing market's kind of bonkers at the moment. But.
That's a great question. This person asked, I installed solar panels a couple of years ago and thought I could always add battery later. Now I hear conversion of the inverter will cost almost as much as the original. Am I being misinformed? Could you address costs a little more? Panels were my incentive to live to age 100 for payback. Another 30 years is not a realistic goal.
Yeah, so there's, you know, I can't really speak to the technical elements of, you know, your system and you know, the need for a new inverter. What I would actually suggest is, you know, if you've got questions like that, you know, you can, you know, call up or email, and one of our energy technicians might be able to help kind of, you know, point you in the right direction, or provide a little bit more context. And I'm not myself a engineer or an electrician, and, you know, I'm the guy they trot out to smile and wave, but so I don't want to give you dicey technical advice. I mean, you know, a home solar array, you know, often costs you know, $10,000 to $20,000, and you know, there are some incentive programs for battery systems, but you know, kind of cobbling those things together and how it all fits, you know, can be a little tricky. And you know, even things like I mentioned about like the panel upgrades that sometimes are necessary, you know, that can depend on the age of the home and various factors. So I would suggest, you know, reaching out to our office, and that's where we have folks that can, you know, not necessarily answer every time. You know, we don't have like solar installers that are going to go say, oh, use this installer or that. You know, we're a public agency, so we don't like generally recommend a particular installer, but you know, could help you know, answer some general questions, and or, you know, point towards resources that are available to answer those kinds of things.
Another question. The cheapest energy is energy not used. Conservation needs to be promoted as an essential part of any energy program. Your comment?
Yeah, and that's, you know, I mentioned that that's always been our bread and butter, and you know, what we started out doing in 2003 was, you know, entirely energy efficiency, and we've added other stuff, but you know, that's one of the sort of central things that we always try to do when we work with customers is like, well, first reduce your consumption, you know, and don't waste energy, because that's, you know, almost always going to be the least expensive thing to do. And, you know, then you're getting more bang for your buck out of your solar or whatever. And so, you know, we always kind of begin there. And particularly when we're working with, you know, even, you know, large customers where, like, let's say somebody, you know, one of the cities wants to do solar at their wastewater treatment facility. It's like, well, let's first make it as efficient as we can. And then we'll look at how we can, you know, add these other kinds of systems, because it's going to be a lot cheaper to reduce your load rather than installing more solar and more batteries than you need. You know, and then also if you're like, well, if you want to be able to add a, you know, if your roof's only so big and you want to be able to charge your car and power your home, you know, being as efficient as possible is another part of that. So yeah, we always start when we work with somebody as efficiency first.
Thanks again. The proposed wind farm on Monument, Mount Pierce out of Rio Dell, was not welcome and stopped. How will the ocean wind farm be different?
Yeah, so you know, I think that project, I would say, confirmed the importance of the approach that we've been trying to take, where, you know, when we first sort of had the glimmer of an idea of wanting to do this, like, okay, let's talk to folks and talk to local, like I said, environmental groups and local tribal representatives and local fishermen, you know, so before we even like mentioned that we were doing anything, like, let's go talk to the fishermen, let's go talk to local tribes. And I think, you know, that sort of focus on involving people in the process and making sure that concerns are heard and addressed, you know, is pretty critical to having a successful project. You know, as I mentioned, you know, so the Wiyot tribe strongly opposed that project, and I think, you know, they were, I think, the deciding factor in the board of supervisors not approving it. And as I mentioned, it's not like it's a done deal and they're just, you know, gung ho no matter what we want to do or where we want to do it. But they did, the Wiyot tribe provided a letter of support for when we first proposed doing wind off the coast. And so I think, you know, starting with community and stakeholders, and then, you know, kind of working through the process with those kinds of folks really involved upfront is what's, I think gives me hope that we'll be able to be successful, and, and just, that project and others, like, they've been working on planning and developing that project for a number of years before there was even like any, public announcement that it was in the works. And so I think, it seemed like it was rushed because it was like, oh, there's been multiple years of planning and now we're hearing about it instead of hearing about it before those years of planning. And then, I think they obviously didn't, they either didn't engage community stakeholders adequately, or they didn't take into account the feedback that they got from those community stakeholders. And ultimately that was, the reason I think that failed.
And then also the same person asked, why put wind farms 25 miles off the coast? The benefit is almost not being able to see them. The drawback is 25 miles of giant cables to move the energy.
Yeah, so it's not just the visual impacts. Obviously, it does reduce visual impacts significantly, but it is more expensive to go farther out. But you also get more power output by going farther out because the wind is more consistent and stronger kind of the farther you go. And you can only go so far before it gets really deep, or it's just unfeasibly far out. But going out to that 20 to 30 mile range, the economics are actually good because while you do have to pay for more cable, you get more power out of the system. And so it's favorable. And then in addition to, so you're not actually, it's not costing you more to put it out there. It's actually equal or better to put it farther out to a point. And then, wildlife impacts are, again, not eliminated, but significantly reduced by being farther from the coast, as well as fishing impacts. So, if you're close to the shore, then you're starting to get into crab fishing areas and more fishing activity. Whereas the farther out, in deeper waters, there's still definitely fishing activity, but less of it out there. So.
There's a couple other comments. I don't see any other questions right now, but one person indicated that Monument was also a sacred site to the tribe, which I think that was part of the reason it didn't move forward. And the other comment is about Solar Rights Alliance and AB 1139, the utility profit grab. Can you speak about any of that?
Yeah, I'll just say, so certainly folks, there was a bill that is currently dead that was going to greatly diminish the sort of customer benefits of installing solar. My board took a opposed position on that, as did many others, and so it's I think it's been buried at this point. Although these kinds of things can pop up in the next year's legislation again, or a new zombie version of the same thing. So we certainly track that, as does the trade association we're part of, to collect and monitor these things. But yeah, we opposed that bill and it failed. So.
Oh, that's good to know. Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any other questions in the chat, and so I just want to thank you so much, Matthew, for this great presentation and so full of great, wonderful information. And I would encourage people to contact your office or to look on your website for more.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. Joining you for the virtual lunch that you're all having. Hopefully.
That's right. And then I also want to invite everybody back to join us next week for themes of innovation in senior living design. And Leslie Moldow is an architect with Perkins Eastman, and they're working with Life Care Humboldt to design a senior living community in Humboldt County. So that's happening next week, and we hope you'll join us for that. Thank you again, Matthew. Wonderful presentation, and thank you all for being here today. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
All right, have a good
Thank you very much.
afternoon.
Thank you. Excellent.